For my book review, I did Dante's Inferno, which is the first part of Dante Alighieri's 14th century epic poem Divine Comedy. Dante is guided by the poet Virgil through the 9 circles of hell, each one for various crimes. The first circle of hell is Limbo, which isn't necessarily for bad people. It's more of a diet hell than an actual hell. It was reserved for people like pagans who were not baptized, and people who were like virtuous, but not sinful enough to warrant like eternal damnation, but more people who just didn't accept the religion. The second circle of hell is lust, which honestly I didn't quite understand, because the only thing that seemed like really bad about it, there really wasn't anything bad about it. It was just kind of this place where you were surrounded by famously like lustful people like Cleopatra and Helen of Troy. And it's basically this hodgepodge of just lustful people. The third circle represents the sin of gluttony and was characterized by an eternal rain of slush. This wouldn't sound too bad except for the fact that the souls that are stuck here are fat blobs they can't move, and they're incredibly uncomfortable, so there's just nothing they can do about their situation. The fifth circle is defined by greed, which is reserved for people who put material goods above their fellow man. These people were forced to use weights as jousts and pushing other people with these weights as if they were jousting. They're forced to do this eternally. The fifth circle was reserved for the sin of wrath. In this circle, the souls that end up here are forced to fight each other viciously for eternity, whilst the sullen, people who are passively wrathful, are eternally sunken beneath the water, where they can see nothing. This reflects the passive nature of their wrathfulness, and it denies them the privilege of even getting to express that rage. Is reserved for heretics who have committed the sin of heresy. These people are trapped in flaming tombs in eternal pain. It's rather simple. I had a little bit of trouble understanding how this one related to the sin. With the other circles of hell, there's a very clear indicator of why they're getting punished in this specific way, but for the sixth circle, it feels a little bit like a generic sort of punishment that doesn't specifically fit the sin that these souls have committed in any way. So I thought that was a bit interesting. Ring 7 is where things start to get legitimately interesting to me. This ring is reserved for violence and has 3 different rings concerned around different types of violence. Ring 1 is reserved for violence against others, where souls are immersed in a river of flowing blood and fire. Centaurs guard the shore of the river, shooting anybody who tries to leave it, basically leaving them in eternal burning pain. Ring 2 is concerned with violence against yourself, where people who attempted suicide are turned into terrifying, living trees that sound awful. They're only allowed to speak when they're bleeding and broken. This circle was specifically designed because these humans disrespected the human form, and as such, in the afterlife, they're denied having a human form, and are instead forced into excruciating pain. Ring 3 is violence against God, and by extension, nature. It is a plain of burning sand. Blasphemers are stretched upon the sand, while sodomites run in circles. Ring 8 is reserved for the sin of fraud. There are many different categories for people who end up here. Firstly, panderers and seducers are whipped while walking, mimicking being a slave, because that's how they treated people when they were alive. Flatterers are dipped in literal excrement, representing the bullcrap of their own words. Simoniacs, or people who used money to get into office, are placed upside down and have their feet burned. That one's rather simple. There are multiple other categories, but since there's so many, I'm going to list them off right now. Sorcerers, barrators, hypocrites, counselors of fraud, thieves, falsifiers, and sowers of discord are all placed within the 8th ring of hell for their many different crimes, all receiving different punishments. The 9th circle of hell is reserved for the sin of treachery, where it is a giant frozen lake where people who have committed the sin of treachery are trapped in the ice, with a varying degree of discomfort and pain depending on which treachery they committed. There's 4 kinds: treachery to family, treachery to countries, treachery to guests, and treacheries to lords. Depending on how bad this treachery was, they are denied a certain amount of comfort and shelter against this frozen lake. At the very center of hell, condemned for committing the ultimate sin of treachery, is Satan himself, half frozen in the ice, eternally flapping his wings and sobbing. He has 3 heads, and he's constantly suffering. He's not allowed to say anything, and he's only allowed to suffer. There are about 3 main themes in Dante's Inferno that I think summarize the story fairly well. The first one is that God's judgments are always perfect and correct. As we go through hell, each and every sin that is committed has a punishment tailor-made that ironically punishes that person in a way that would make them suffer the most. As such, all punishments fit the crimes committed, arguably by the logic that was used at the time. Dante's Inferno is kind of an analysis of human evil and sin, and showing how that can corrupt and destroy us, which I find interesting, because all of the miniature analyses of these different kinds of people is very interesting to look at, because you have a multitude of sins varying from something as minor as lust all the way down to literal treachery against God. So the journey is a kind of it starts at a very high point of, people who are very chill and good, going all the way down to people who have done terrible things and are in eternal suffering and pain with these weird and unusual punishment. As far as how this relates to the historical scholarship of the book, this poem is kind of a love letter combining a lot of aspects of different religions and mythos and kind of combining them into this one concept. Now, Dante is very clearly incredibly biased. He hated the Greeks, and you see that in here, as almost every single one of Dante's enemies is in hell. And every single Greek hero that you can think of is also in eternal punishment for doing terrible things. As such, this is kind of a microcosm of different ideas from the religions at the time, grouped together in a very easily digestible way. This kind of points in the polar opposite of the Purgatorio, the second part of Dante's incredible poem, as this one, they're both kind of 2 sides of the same coin, where Dante's Inferno starts out at a pretty decent point and then serves only to get lower and lower and lower as you delve into this horrifying torture realm of hatred and suffering. And as you get to the higher parts, through finally going into the Purgatorio, it goes from starting to the bad to the top, which is a very interesting juxtaposition with him going into hell. In conclusion, Dante's Inferno was a great read because it teaches you a lot about the religions of the time and a lot about what the political scene was in Dante's time. So I think that this is a great book to read and is very important to what we're learning about.